Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to the 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Barry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Barry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. On our Visitors Edition today, our guest is Notre Dame beat writer Carter Karels from the South Bend Tribune, ndinsider.com, and a contributor on the Pod of Gold podcast, so as you can see, he's a busy guy. A reminder that wherever you get your podcast from, please like us, leave a comment or rating, and let us know what we can do better or what you would like to hear on the show. You can also email me anytime with your Maize and Blue thoughts at the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. That's the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. Before our guest joins us, let's get it started as we always do with my view from Section 17. When you say Notre Dame around Michigan fans, you get a reaction. Oftentimes it's something like this: they need us on their schedule, we don't need them. Mention Michigan to some Notre Dame fans, and I've heard them call us arrogant, overrated, and many other things I won't repeat here. The point being, this rivalry elicits strong feelings on both sides. I come from a family where my dad was a die-hard Irish fan. My grandfather had two brothers graduate from Notre Dame. Growing up Irish Catholic in Michigan, oftentimes people who meet you assume you are a Notre Dame fan, which was always amusing to me. The IHM nuns that taught me down at St. Charles School in Newport, Michigan, were all die-hard Notre Dame fans, and they prayed that those of us who were Wolverines or Spartans would eventually come to the light, and it never happened. But this game has always been special to me for those and many other reasons. I was there at the renewal of the series in 1978 when Bo took his team down to South Bend, and behind senior quarterback Ricky Leach, earned a 28-14 come-from-behind victory. Now, the guy under center for Notre Dame was no slouch either, Joe Montana. I can still hear Bob Ufer's voice as the wind stopped in 1980 and Harry Oliver booted his 51-yard field goal to beat us in South Bend 29-27. It sounded as if someone was carving Bob Ufer's heart out. He said the score 3 times before he got it right. Then there was the catch in 1991. I was sitting in the end zone on 4th down and a foot deep in Notre Dame territory. Gary Moeller made the call. Elvis Gerbach pumped once and threw to the corner of the end zone where a streaking, double-covered Desmond Howard hauled in the game-winning touchdown. Then there was 2011, the original Under the Lights game, and that famous frenzied drive led by Denard Robinson, who found Roy Roundtree for the game winner as time expired. I've never heard it that loud in Michigan Stadium. There have been so many other great moments in this rivalry. This game means so much to so many people for so many reasons. It is a great rivalry. Sadly, after this Saturday night, it could be over, but I doubt it. It might take a few years, but I think the series will be renewed again at some point. Even Jim Harbaugh thinks it will and hopes it will. Joining us next on this week's Visitors Edition is beat writer Carter Karels from the South Bend Tribune, here on the Michigan Man, in partnership with our friends at SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Here with us on our visitors segment this week as we get ready for another game under the lights at the Big House is Carter Karels, who covers Notre Dame football for the South Bend Tribune, also the NotreDameInsider.com, and can also be heard on the Pod of Gold podcast, which is, as I mentioned to Carter, is a really cool name for a podcast. Great to have you with us, Carter.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you having me.
Well, Carter, when we get ready for this game, and if you've been around as long as I have, I was there in 1978 when the series renewed, so I get sort of hung up on the stats. In 32 games since the renewal of the series, again in 1978, Notre Dame leads 16 wins against 15 losses, and they have one tie. In those 32 years, this has to be the most evenly matched series during that time period in college football.
Yeah, and this weekend's game, I saw Michigan was favored, and now it looks like Notre Dame might be favored by one.
Yeah.
And it's going back and forth every day, I guess. So, I mean, even this weekend's game is, you have no idea what's going to happen, pretty even. So that's pretty cool, too.
Well, and I don't want to bore us with stats, but one that I find interesting is also that the home team has won all 8 games played at night, and I think Michigan hopes that continues this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think Notre Dame has been preparing for the environment. I know Georgia in September was kind of a tough environment for Notre Dame, had a lot of false starts and self-inflicted wounds, some penalties, some problems with the snap cadence. So I know they spent the bye week this past week nailing down that snap cadence, that silent count, hoping that, the environment's not going to be as crazy as it was at Georgia. So I think they've been working toward that, but we'll see how they handle it.
Let's talk a minute about head coach Brian Kelly, if we could. Something interesting, another stat that's interesting to me is he's the 5th coach to be on the job in Notre Dame's history for 10 years or more, which is sort of surprising to me, but he has done really an outstanding job in South Bend, hasn't he?
He has. I mean, I think the turning point was that 2016 season. I know a lot of Notre Dame fans, some Notre Dame fans wanted him gone after 2016, the 4-8 season, and I think really you saw a fundamental change. His players, the parents of players approached him, addressed kind of the things that he needed to change within the program, and he listened and he made the appropriate changes, and you've seen how it's played out. Went 10-3, then 12-1, making the playoff last season, and once again has a top 10 team this year. So I believe he's won 26 of his last 31 games, I believe. So definitely the trajectory of the program, the recruiting trail has been promising. So he has made the appropriate changes, whereas, for a little bit there, you felt like, ooh, I don't know. I don't know what his future looks like, but the future looks promising under Kelly right now.
Well, here in the state of Michigan, we've known about Brian Kelly for a long time because he was head coach at Grand Valley State over in Allendale, then went up to Central Michigan on the way to Cincinnati and then up to Notre Dame. So we've known about him for a long time, and you're right, he's sort of mellowed out a little bit. I think that was one of the things that a lot of folks around Notre Dame were wanting him to notch it down a bit, but he is one intense guy, isn't he?
I've covered Notre Dame for a little bit over a year now, and I think I had the right perception of Kelly coming into the job. I knew him as this kind of hot-headed guy who, he'd tear into his players. You'd see him on the sideline, red-faced, puffed up. But I haven't really seen that at all these last couple of years, and obviously winning will help that. But I really do think that he is way more composed now, way more relaxed. He does yoga once a week. So I really do think that he has taken the right approach of mellowing out. It's kind of helped his players respond better to him. I think that it allows him to coach better. So, I mean, yeah, he's still fiery. We've been to quite a few practices and have seen him tearing the players, but it is not like what it used to be.
Well, this is the last scheduled meeting between these two rivals. Monday at his press conference, though, Jim Harbaugh said there have been talks about signing up again for another, I don't know how many years, but have you heard anything in South Bend about that kind of talk?
Yeah, I know my coworker Eric Hansen talked with the athletic director, Drex Warbrick, about this last November, and it's kind of tough because Notre Dame has to schedule so far in advance. They've got games in like 2036 already set up. So, I think they'd want to, but it's a matter of getting it on the schedule. I think it's a really difficult thing to do. I mean, they'll schedule teams. They'll schedule home and homes like 5 years apart. I want to say Arkansas comes to Notre Dame Stadium next year, and then they don't come back to Arkansas until like 2025. So to schedule a home and home or a series, it's kind of difficult. I think the want to do it is there. It's a matter of scheduling conflict.
Well, this Saturday, the Irish come to the Big House with a 5-1 record. The only loss was on that road game at Georgia. And that was a very competitive game with what a lot of people think is the best one-loss team in college football, Carter. The Irish played very well, didn't they?
They did. We didn't really know how they would come out because they're down a couple starters. Wide receiver Michael Young was out with a collarbone injury. Their starting running back, Jafar Armstrong, was out with an abdominal injury. The linebackers looked pretty shaky in game one. There was a lot of question marks about the team, but they really answered the call, I thought. I thought Ian Book made enough plays to win the game, but it just wasn't there. They had it right at the end. Maybe he could have made one or two more plays, but I thought for the most part they battled well. They had a few self-inflicted wounds with penalties, and especially on third down. But I thought their defense played well against Jake Fromm, and their linebackers showed a lot of improvement. And certainly their linebackers look entirely different than they did game one against Louisville. So, I think Georgia was kind of the wake-up call. Heading into that game, I think a lot of Notre Dame media members thought maybe this is a 9-3 team, but after that game, started okay, well maybe 11-1 is possible. So, and I think if Notre Dame's to beat Michigan this weekend, Michigan's the best team left on Notre Dame's schedule. So if they win this game, they very well could go 11-1.
Well, the Irish, as we know, were 12-0 last season. Made it to the playoffs where they lost to national champion Clemson. Lost a boatload of talent to the NFL, and I know, again, they have that one loss to Georgia right now, but how would you compare this team to last year's as far as the potential?
Well, last year's team was a revelation defensively. You had an All-American corner in Julian Love. You had a defensive tackle in Jerry Tillery that was a first-round draft pick. And then you had two veteran linebackers, Drew Tranquil, Tevin Coney, that were really, really good. And this year they've had to rely on younger talent in certain areas. They also lost Miles Boykin, a wide receiver, in the third round. I think last year was full of surprises just because, Ian Book didn't start the year as the starter. Their starting running back, Dexter Williams, was suspended the first 4 games, didn't play until Game 5, and he ended up being a lot better than people thought he would be. And so this year, similarly, we didn't really know what we'd expect since there's a lot of young talent they're kind of relying upon. But I think kind of the theme of this year's team has been that, I think we saw them shoot themselves in the foot a little bit against Georgia, but other than that, this has been a really clean team. They don't have a ton of penalties. They're extremely good in the red zone. I believe they're number 1 in the country in turnover margin. So they're not going to lose a game. If they lose a game, they're not going to lose a game because they had self-inflicted wounds. If they lose, it's going to be because the other team's better than them. So, I like what defensive coordinator Clark Lee has done at Notre Dame this year. I don't think Ian Book has played at the level that Irish fans expected him to, and maybe his expectations were pretty lofty, but I think there's still a ways to go for Ian Book before he can declare for the NFL draft or anything like that.
Well, let's talk about some of the names on that Notre Dame offense that we're going to see in the Big House this Saturday evening. And going back to Ian Book for just a moment, really developed last year. I like what I saw from him. Granted, I've only seen bits and pieces of Notre Dame this year, but talk about his play and maybe why people are a little bit disappointed so far.
Yeah, Ian Book, I mean, with the way he played last year, didn't lose a game until the college football playoff against, the national champion in Clemson.
Yeah.
When you have a start like he did, you expect a ton out of him, and especially at a place like Notre Dame. It's almost college football playoff or bust at this point. And he's never been the one to put up crazy numbers, but I think he just has struggled with consistency at times this year. He'll string together 2 or 3 really, really good drives. He'll go right down the field. And then there'll be a quarter or a quarter and a half stretch where it's 3-and-out city. And I think heading into the season, not a lot of people were expecting that. This is an offense that has some good playmakers in Chase Claypool and Cole Kmet, the tight end. So, I think this is an offense that's capable of scoring 35-plus a game, but they just haven't kind of stringed together that consistency from Ian Book yet. The number one knock on Book is probably his deep ball. I think he has the arm strength to deliver the deep ball. It's just a matter of confidence. You've seen him have, kind of happy feet in the pocket where pressure won't be coming and he'll be getting out of the pocket for no reason. So there's little things here and there, but I expect him to continue to progress. I don't think the Book is out on Book, yeah. Pun intended.
Well, the receiving core that he has to throw to has a really solid trio. Chase Claypool, outstanding receiver, Chris Fink, and tight end Cole Kmet. Very, very good group.
Yep, yeah. I think Cole Kmet has, I guess you want to call him a surprise. Like, I think we saw him do this in the spring, and then in early August. We knew what he was capable of, but he has really put it together. I think this might be a weaker tight end class as far as the NFL draft goes. And, man, if he's the number one tight end taken in this NFL draft in 2020, I would not be surprised. He's really put it together. I believe if he qualified for it, he'd be leading the country among tight ends and receptions per game. He's just got a wide catch radius. He's one heck of an athlete. He can block. He can run routes. Very nimble tight end. Chase Claypool, it really took a while for him to get it all together, but he is just one heck of an athlete as an outside wide receiver. He can come down with the 50-50 balls. And I think he still has more production to be had because he hasn't really had the 100-yard game yet, and I think he's definitely capable of that. But this offense, the way it's constructed is they kind of like to disperse the ball to a lot of different guys. So you're never really going to see these gaudy numbers. But Chase Claypool, definitely an NFL talent, and the sky is the limit for him.
Well, and this offense also likes to run the football, and I was watching the SC game a couple of weeks ago. Tony Jones Jr. looks pretty darn good right now.
That was surprising. I'll admit it. Jafar Armstrong was the number one back. He was the best running back on the team, and I thought by a good margin. And, Tony Jones, first few weeks, played all right, played well against Louisville, but, never had the elite speed. I think with him, he's not the guy who's going to have 4.3 speed or anything like that, but he's just pretty good at everything. He can pass block. He can catch passes out of the backfield. He can run inside, outside the tackles. He's just kind of a do-it-all back. Not elite speed, but pretty good at everything else. And Notre Dame has really liked that. He's a veteran presence in the locker room. And I think adding Jafar Armstrong back in the mix, he played a little bit against USC, but I think they didn't want to give him a huge workload, given that he had just coming back from the abdominal injury. So I think it'll be interesting to see just how many carries Armstrong gets. Again, I think he's the most talented back out of the group, so maybe they go 50-50. I'm not sure. Maybe they ride the hot hand, but that kind of remains to be seen. But right now, they are really liking what they are seeing out of Tony Jones. That's for sure.
Yeah, I had seen bits and pieces of him and then got to sit down and watch the SC game. And you're right, he is not the fastest, he's not the biggest, but the one thing, and you hear coaches talk about this all the time, vision. He really seems to see the field very, very well.
Vision, really the little things. Brian Kelly, every time you ask him about Tony Jones, his face lights up, and he talks about all the little things. He says, he'll even admit, he'll say, Tony Jones does not run a 4.3 4-yard dash, but I would take 40 Tony Joneses on my team. That's the way he likes him, because he just does everything to the level that they like him to, and he doesn't make a ton of mistakes. So, yeah, I think it was a big loss not having Jafar Armstrong in the backfield. He was a former wide receiver recruit that kind of moved to the running back position and really showed a lot to the staff last year when he played as a reserve. And the thought was that they'd get both of these guys on the field at the same time because they're both versatile players. They could line up Jafar Armstrong in the slot. They could have both of them in the backfield, 2-back sets, really use them in a lot of different ways, make the offense a little bit more unpredictable and make some mismatches when having them as receivers. So having both of these guys on the field, I'm interested to see how much Notre Dame does that. Again, my thought is they're going to ride Jones more, but if Armstrong shows them something early in the game, you probably have to use him too, because again, he's got the most speed and he's the most capable all-around back in that backfield.
Well, over on the other side of the ball, Carter, the defense is led by two projected very high round picks in defensive ends, Julian Okwara and Khalid Kareem. They're quite the tandem, aren't they?
They are. You know, what was funny was one of my coworkers, Tyler James, did a magazine story with Julian Okwara, and he set out his goal for this season, 18.5 sacks. That was his goal, and that would have led last year's group by a wide margin. And really, to begin the year, I believe the first 3 games he didn't have a sack. People were thinking, "Oh my goodness, this guy cursed himself saying that he's going to get 18.5 sacks." But he has really showed up these last couple games. Virginia, USC, Bowling Green. He's really showed up. So has Khalid Kareem. And this defensive line is finally playing at a level that people expected them to play. I think the defensive tackles, like Kurt Heinisch and Myron Tagovailoa-Amosa, have played better than people thought they would. I think maybe the depth behind the defensive tackles has been the concern, but the depth behind the defensive ends is crazy good. The defensive line coach, Mike Elston, has really recruited that position well and developed the talent well, and you see it in Okwara and Kareem. Okwara was not really a high-rated recruit, and he was really skinny out of high school. He looked almost like a maybe a linebacker, I don't know, but he's about 215 pounds maybe. Now he's up to 248. So special talents, definitely two guys that Michigan will have to account for.
Brian Kelly, from what you hear and understand, is he fairly happy with the defensive play so far this year?
I think so, because again, last year you're asking them to replace a lot of good talent.
Yeah.
Julian Love, All-American. Jerry Tillery, first-round pick. 2 linebackers that were special. and they had to replace all that. And again, the linebacker play was really bad over the summer. In August, they were cycling through like 9 different linebackers at 3 spots. They had no idea who they were going to play. And they finally found 3 guys in Drew White, Asmar Bilal, and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. They finally came together. The Louisville game was their roughest game, and now they have come together. And I think that's been the big surprise for Brian Kelly is I don't think they really knew what was going to happen with the linebackers. Was this going to be a rotation of sorts every game for the whole season? It's certainly not at this point. They have found their 3 guys, and so I think they're really pleased with their play, and their safeties are playing at a high level. Their cornerbacks shaky at times, but I think collectively the defense has exceeded expectations.
Well, heading into this week's game, and I know you've been studying the matchups all week to see how Notre Dame shapes up against Michigan. Do you have a good feel for how these two teams match up?
It's interesting. Really the biggest matchup to me is how Notre Dame's offense is going to look against Don Brown and Michigan's defense. I know Michigan really challenges opponents in terms of man coverage on the outside, on the perimeter, and then blitzing and giving these exotic looks. And I'm interested to see how Ian Book can handle that. I think Notre Dame's offense has really struggled at times this year with consistency. There's times where they look really good, and there's other times where it's punt city. And so I talked with Ian Book about this last night, and what he said is he thinks the game plan against Michigan is to basically take shots. You got to take advantage and exploit that aggressiveness through fitting the ball into tight windows, taking chances deep, and just really being aggressive. Match aggressiveness with aggressiveness. So how Notre Dame's offense looks against Michigan's defense, I think, is kind of the key here. Michigan's offense, I thought it was interesting to see them kind of take a step up last week in the second half against Penn State. I overall really think this is going to be a defensive battle. I think both offenses will have these spans where it's 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. It just kind of seems like the theme for both teams at parts of this season. So I'm going to predict a defensive battle in this one.
Well, Michigan fans know how big this game is for our season, but it is huge for Notre Dame too, because the playoff chances still very much alive for the Fighting Irish, aren't they?
It's interesting because I think the prevailing thought among Irish fans was, okay, Georgia's got to go undefeated. They've got to beat everybody. This one loss needs to look really good. Well, now that Georgia has lost, basically it's got to root for chaos at this point. Notre Dame fans were even arguing last week, well, do they root for Penn State or do they root for Michigan? Like, Notre Dame fans rooting for Michigan is kind of hilarious to me, but that was being talked about, that they have to root for all these crazy things to happen at this point. And I think it's a small chance, even if they go undefeated, but I know that even if they do win out here, they've got a great chance they will make a New Year's Six Bowl at the very least. And Notre Dame hasn't won a New Year's Six Bowl, so that would be quite an accomplishment under Brian Kelly at the very least. And certainly I think they'd want to beat Michigan and win out. So to see what would happen with those chances. But yeah, it's basically team chaos at this point. Yeah. They're rooting for everyone to lose.
And you never know. Down this stretch, we might get chaos. The last couple of years, crazy things have happened, so we'll see. But final question for you, Carter. As we are hearing all week, this rivalry has produced some of the best games in college football over the last 40 years. Now, I know you're new to the scene there in South Bend, but everyone's seen Notre Dame and Michigan wherever you are in the country at some point in their life. Do you have a moment or a game that sort of sticks out to you in this series as, wow, unforgettable?
I'm going to go with last year's. I know that's kind of cheating, but it was really memorable to me because, it was my first game covering Notre Dame, and I wasn't sure what to expect. I grew up kind of in SEC country, so I'd always kind of seen those venues and had a high expectation for college football venues. And Notre Dame, you hear all the time about how big time it is and all that. Well, I went to this first game, and I really wasn't impressed. And I think it was because they've got kind of a sound-isolated press box where a soundproof press box where you don't really hear the crowd as much. But I didn't know this. I had no idea. It's my first time here. So for all I know, the fans are just whispering the whole time. And so I really was kind of disappointed. And then when I came down on the field with 5 minutes left, they let you come on the field with 5 minutes left. It was a completely different story. Obviously, it was a one-possession game that ended that went right down to the wire. And that was a turning point for me. Just seeing that final Michigan drive, how crazy the fans were. It just blew my mind, because I'm thinking, okay, what's wrong with the press box? Like, why am I not hearing anything? But it was a lot of fun to see that.
With us today on our visitor segment has been Carter Karels, who covers Notre Dame football for the South Bend Tribune, the NotreDameInsider.com, and can also be heard on the Pod of Gold podcast. Carter, I appreciate you taking so much time to chat with us. Enjoy your first trip to the Big House, and we hope to have you back again in the future.
You bet, Mike. Can't wait.
Quick Hits is next as we wrap it up for another week here on The Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. On Quick Hits today, no real injury news to talk about, so let's roll into our game day notes. Michigan holds the all-time lead in this series with 24 wins against 18 losses, and there has been one tie. The first game in the series took place on November 11th, 1887 in South Bend, an 8-0 Michigan win. Last year we lost the season opener down in South Bend, 24-17. Brian Kelly is 65-34 in his 10 years as head man at Notre Dame. Last year they were 12-1, losing to Clemson 30-3 in the playoffs. They ended the season ranked number 5. They are ranked number 8 heading into this week's game and are 5-1. We all know how the weather changes around here, but this is what the weatherman says right now. Cloudy skies and light rain during the day with temps in the low to mid-50s. Temps will be in the upper 40s during the game with a 40% chance of occasional rain showers. So if you're headed to the Big House, dress warm and bring your rain gear. So like you, I'm hoping the team we saw in the second half last week in Happy Valley is the team we see for 4 quarters this week against Notre Dame. If history in this series is any indication, we are in for a humdinger under the lights in the Big House. We need this game. The team needs it to flip the script on the season. And we, the fans, young, old, and in between, need to feel that Big House rock again and feel what it's like to win a big game on the big stage. That will do it for this week, though. Have a great Wolverine weekend, everyone. Enjoy the game and think victory beat Notre Dame. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go Blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!